Can you hear me? Trivananda Prabhu?
Yes,
Yes,
go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Prabhu.
Prabhu. Okay.
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Maharaj,
Maharaj,
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
dear
dear
devotees,
devotees,
please
please
accept my
accept my
humble
humble
obeisances.
obeisances.
All
All
glories to
glories to
Srila
Srila
Prabhupada.
Prabhupada.
So, we
So
would
we would
like to
like to
welcome
welcome
all of
all of
you
you
and
and
thank you
thank you
very
very
much
much
for
for
joining
joining
us on
us
this
on this
special
special
occasion
occasion
today.
today.
So,
So
on this
on this
live
live
stream
stream
currently
currently
is a
is a
presentation
presentation
by the
by the
Ministry
Ministry
of
of
Devotee
Devotee
Care in
Care in
South
South
Africa
Africa
and
and
forms a
forms a
part of
part
the
of the
series of
series of
talks with
talks with
Srila
Srila
Prabhupada's
Prabhupada's
leading
leading
disciples
disciples
around the
around the
world.
world.
So,
So
at the
at the
moment,
moment,
we
we
are
are
live
live
on
on
Zoom
Zoom
and
and
on the
on the
Facebook
Facebook
mediums.
mediums.
Our
Our
guest
guest
speaker
speaker
for
for
today
today
is
is
His
His
Holiness
Holiness
Bhakti
Bhakti
Chaitanya
Chaitanya
Swami
Swami
Maharaj.
Maharaj.
Maharaj, we
Maharaj,
are
we are
very,
very,
very
very
grateful
grateful
that you
that you
have
have
taken the
taken the
time
time
off
off
your
your
demanding
demanding
schedule
schedule
to
to
grace us
grace
with
us
your
with your
wonderful
wonderful
presence
presence
and to
and to
enlighten
enlighten
us
us
on
on
our
our
topic
topic
for
for
today,
today,
which
which
is
is
Devotee
Devotee
Care
Care
Excellence.
Excellence.
And
And
since
since
today
today
is a
is a
wonderful
wonderful
festival
festival
in
in
our
our
Gaudiya
Gaudiya
Vaishnav
Vaishnav
calendar,
calendar,
Maharaj will
Maharaj will
also be
also be
speaking
speaking
about this
about this
festival,
festival,
namely
namely
the
the
Panihati
Panihati
festival.
festival.
So
So
thank you
thank you
very
very
much,
much,
Maharaj,
Maharaj,
for
for
joining
joining
us.
us.
Before we
Before we
hand
hand
over
over
to
to
Maharaj and
Maharaj and
introduce
introduce
Maharaj,
Maharaj
actually,
actually,
we
we
just
just
like to
like to
mention
mention
some
some
basic
basic
rules
rules
so
so
that this
that this
program
program
goes
goes
through
through
smoothly
smoothly
and
and
effectively.
effectively.
Firstly, for
Firstly, for
those of you
those of
that
you that
have
have
joined
joined
on
on
the
the
Zoom
Zoom
link,
link,
kindly
kindly
make
make
sure
sure
that
that
your
your
devices are
devices are
mute
mute
so
so
there are
there
no
are no
disturbances
disturbances
whilst
whilst
Maharaj is
Maharaj is
speaking.
speaking.
Secondly,
Secondly,
you know, we
we
we'd
we'd
like for
like for
this to
this
be
to
an
be an
interactive
interactive
session.
session.
So if
So
you
if you
have
have
any
any
questions,
questions,
comments, or
comments, or
anything
anything
that you'd
that you'd
like to
like to
bring up
bring up
Recording in
to
progress.
Maharaj's
Maharaj's
attention,
attention.
if you'd
If you'd
like to
like
bring
to bring
anything
anything
up
up
or
or
have a
have a
question
question
specifically,
specifically,
you're more
you're
than
more than
welcome
welcome
to
to
post your
post your
question
question
on
on
the
the
Facebook
Facebook
and
and
Zoom
Zoom
link.
link.
And
And
once
once
Maharaj is
Maharaj is
done
done
speaking, we
speaking,
will
we will
then
then
um,
um,
read
read
out your
out your
questions to
questions to
Maharaj.
Maharaj.
And
And
Maharaj
Maharaj
will
will
answer as
answer as
many
many
questions
questions
as
as
possible.
possible.
And
And
don't
don't
forget,
forget,
if you
if
are
you
on
are on
Facebook,
Facebook,
please
please
make
make
sure
sure
to
to
hit the
hit the
like
like
button
button
and
and
share
share
this
this
stream with
stream with
all your
all your
contact.
contact.
Coming to
Coming
our
to our
introduction to
introduction to
Maharaj,
Maharaj,
I'm
I'm
sure
sure
many of
many
us
of
are
us are
joining
joining
this
this
program
program
rather
rather
to
to
have
have
Maharaj's
Maharaj's
association.
association.
And
And
generally,
generally,
as much
as
as
much
we
as we
like to
like
do
to
it,
do it,
Maharaj
Maharaj
doesn't
doesn't
really
really
need an
need an
introduction.
introduction.
But
But
just for
just for
my
my
clarification,
clarification,
I would
I would
like
like
to,
to,
give an
give an
introduction
introduction
and a
and a
little
little
background
background
of
of
Maharaj,
Maharaj,
and
and
let
let
those
those
who are
who are
new or
new or
joining us
joining
here
us
for
here
the
for the
first
first
time
time
know
know
Maharaj's
Maharaj's
position
position
in
in
ISKCON,
ISKCON,
specifically in
specifically in
South Africa.
In South Africa.
So,
So,
firstly,
firstly,
Maharaj
Maharaj
came to
came to
South
South
Africa
Africa
in
in
the year
year
1980 to
1980 to
take
take
up
up
position
position
as
as
temple
temple
president
president
at
at
one of the
one of the
first
first
centers in
centers in
South
South
Africa,
Africa,
namely the
namely the
Cater Ridge
Cater Ridge
Temple.
Temple.
And
And
Maharaj
Maharaj
has
has
very
very
graciously
graciously
given
given
us his
us his
association for
association
the
for the
past
past
41
41
years.
years.
Maharaj
Maharaj
is
is
currently
currently
serving
serving
as the
as the
chairman
chairman
of
of
the
the
ISKCON
ISKCON
governing
governing
body.
body.
Maharaj is
Maharaj is
also an
also an
initiating
initiating
guru,
guru,
providing
providing
spiritual
spiritual
shelter to
shelter to
many
many
devotees
devotees
across the
across the
world
world
in
in
countries
countries
like
like
South
South
Africa,
Africa,
Mauritius,
Mauritius,
Siberia,
Siberia,
Russia,
Russia,
and
and
many,
many,
many
many
more.
more.
Maharaj
Maharaj
is an
is an
author
author
of
of
various
various
books,
books,
namely
namely
Traveling in the
Traveling in the
Service of
Service of
Srila
Srila
Prabhupada,
Prabhupada,
Vrindavan, the
Vrindavan, the
Playground of
Playground of
God,
God.
and
And
Maharaj is
Maharaj is
also,
also,
you
you
know,
know,
he
he
also
also
has
has
various
various
DVDs
DVDs
and
and
videos,
videos,
namely
namely
Glories of
Glories of
Govardhan
Govardhan
Hill
Hill
and
and
so
so
forth, which
forth, which
are
are
available on
available on
DVD
DVD
and on
and on
YouTube.
YouTube.
So,
So,
Maharaj,
Maharaj,
without
without
any
any
further
further
ado,
ado,
we would
we would
like
like
to
to
hand
hand
over to
over to
you.
you,
Just to
just to
let
let
all of
all
you
of you
know
know
the
the
program,
program.
Maharaj's
Maharaj's
talk will
talk will
be
be
approximately
approximately
40
40
minutes,
minutes,
and then
and then
thereafter
thereafter
we will
we will
have some
have some
questions
questions
and
and
announcements.
announcements.
So,
So,
thank you
thank you
very
very
much,
much,
devotees, for
devotees, for
joining.
joining.
And please listen intensively and relish the nectar that is going to flow through the session. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Over to you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Hare Krishna devotees. Thank you, Dhruvananda Prabhu, for inviting me. Rohini Kumar Prabhu for the very too nice introduction. And thank you all for gathering and participating. It's wonderful. The initiative of Devotee Care is wonderful. Today, as the Chida Dahi festival anniversary. Today is wonderful. Well, Krishna consciousness is really wonderful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some examples of devotee care. You could say devotee care in action, as expressed and manifested in some of our literatures, or maybe particularly Chaitanya Charitamrita, actually. Because you find these things. Well, it's also, to some degree, it's in the Bhagavatam, but particularly Chaitanya Charitamrita. So before I begin, just allow me to chant a few mantras. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshtarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So devotees, I want to begin. I'm going to go through a few pastimes from our literatures, from scripture, in which devotee care is demonstrated. And the first one, it's a really good one, and it's one of my favorites, actually, because it shows the value of devotee care, how wonderful is devotee care, but it also shows how terrible or how unfortunate, how unpleasant is the opposite to devotee care. Like negligence, or even beyond negligence, like real negativity in a situation where care would be appropriate, and the unfortunate results that come from that. So the first thing I want to discuss is, it's from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's Antya Leela somewhere. I forget exactly where, but it's there. It's the story of particularly Ishvara Puri, the spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya. Ishvara Puri with his spiritual master Madhavendra Puri. That's on the positive devotee care side. And it's just absolutely wonderful. But then part of the same story, an integral part of the same story, is a demonstration of the opposite to devotee care, which is performed by a person named Ramachandra Puri. So we got three Puris. We got Ishvara Puri, he's the caring devotee. We got Madhavendra Puri, who is to be taken care of. And then we've got Ramachandra Puri, who is the negligent, and even worse than negligent one. So let's begin. So Madhavendra Puri, very, very great devotee, eternal servant of Lord Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan. He is in Goloka, he is a wish-fulfilling tree, Kalpa Vriksha, and he appeared as part of the plan for the appearance of Lord Chaitanya. He appeared a generation, or even 2 generations actually, before Lord Chaitanya, to set the scene. Particularly, specifically actually, to start preaching that the love of Radha and Krishna is the topmost level of Krishna consciousness or spiritual consciousness or religion or anything like that. Radha Krishna's the tops. So anyway, Madhavendra Puri, very great devotee, and he spent his life preaching and spreading Krishna consciousness many years. And he had many disciples. One of his disciples is actually Advaita Acharya. Lord Nityananda is a Siksha disciple from what we can make out. So, he's really a significant person in our line. But then, as happens with all of us, he eventually entered into old age, and then advanced old age, and just before he left this world, he became incapacitated, and he was bedridden. He couldn't even stand up. So he became dependent on care from other devotees. So when he reached this point in his life, the news spread. Somehow or other, the news spread all around, and he had disciples all over India and even surrounding areas, which aren't today necessarily part of India. He was very prominent on a very wide, broad scale. So the devotees came. Many devotees came to pay their last respects. And one of those devotees was Ishvara Puri. So Ishvara Puri came, and he offered his obeisances, and he saw the physically deteriorated condition of Madhavendra Puri, his spiritual master. And he got the inspiration that let me try to help him in this very unfortunate condition materially. Let me try to help him. So he did. And the Chaitanya Charitamrita explains in some detail what he did, but it included things like he would clean up with his own hands the stool and urine of Madhavendra Puri, which anyway, there you go. He would do that, and he would dress him and assist him in whatever ways. And while he was doing that, his mood was just so wonderful. His mood was that, not like, I have to do this sometimes dirty service, and oh gosh, it's so unpleasant and inconvenient. His mood was that Oh, what good fortune! What good fortune to serve my spiritual master so intimately when he really needs it. So while he was doing all those services, he was singing, chanting Hare Krishna, singing bhajans. And so the whole atmosphere was just joyful and blissful. And he carried on doing this until Madhavendra Puri actually passed away. But shortly before Madhavendra Puri passed away, Madhavendra Puri was just so pleased, so appreciative of the care that he was getting from Ishvara Puri, that he blessed him. And he said, "May you become a great devotee and a great lover of God." So like this, Ishvara Puri got this really heartfelt blessing from Madhavendra Puri, this exalted devotee, his spiritual master. And the effect, the result of that was, well, of course, Ishvara Puri became very advanced by the power of those blessings, but actually became so advanced that Lord Chaitanya, when he met Ishvara Puri, and Lord Chaitanya initially met him twice. Once Ishvara Puri came to Navadvip and spent some time there, and Lord Chaitanya associated with him and was very impressed. Second time was in Gaya, when Lord Chaitanya went there to do the last rites for his departed father, Jagannath Mishra. So he met Ishvara Puri for a second time there, and that's where he got initiated by Ishvara Puri. So Ishvara Puri, the blessings he got on the basis of his care was such that he became such a devotee that Lord Chaitanya was so impressed that Lord Chaitanya accepted him as his spiritual master. And Lord Chaitanya really took him very seriously. You know, it's part of Calcutta, sort of, northern Calcutta, just off the road on the way to Mayapur from the airport. There is a suburb, and I forget the name, but there's a suburb. It's not far from Panihati, where this festival that we've been celebrating today took place. It's quite near Panihati, but a little way away. And there is the birthplace of Ishvara Puri. And Lord Chaitanya, after the departure of Ishvara Puri, Lord Chaitanya went there, and Lord Chaitanya took earth. You could say dust, but you could just say earth. He took a whole lot of earth from the place of appearance of Ishvara Puri and put it in a bag. And he carried that bag with him wherever he went. And every day he would eat little bit of the earth from the birthplace of Ishvara Puri. So I'm just making the point that, Lord Chaitanya is Lord Chaitanya, but he took Ishvara Puri so seriously that he would do like that. And this is the result. It's like the fruit, or one of the fruits of Ishvara Puri's devotee care for Madhavendra Puri. So, in other words, if you want to get some mercy, care for the devotees. It's really true. It's really true. If you want to get some mercy from the devotees, get their blessings, help the devotees. Help those who are in need, those who are in difficulty, but ultimately just help devotees, serve the devotees. Srila Jiva Goswami makes the point that he says serving the devotees is a more effective way of developing love for Krishna. Let me, can we mute ourselves, please? So, I can't fight with someone, yeah. So he says, service to the devotees is a more effective way of developing love for Krishna than trying to develop love for Krishna. And Ishvara Puri is such a prime example of the benefits of serving devotees, caring for devotees who are in need of care. Then I mentioned Ramachandra Puri. I won't go talk about him too much, but he's included in the same story in Chaitanya Charitamrita as the contrast to Ishvara Puri of how you get bad results if you don't care, or particularly if you're negligent to devotees and if you treat devotees in uncaring ways. So he was also a disciple of Madhavendra Puri, and he also came in the final stages of the life of Madhavendra Puri. Yeah, he was also a disciple of Madhavendra Puri, a godbrother of Ishvara Puri. So he came to pay his last respects, and Madhavendra Puri's just, maybe just some days away from leaving this world, so the situation physically is really not good. And Madhavendra Puri's in this mood that I'm just about to pass away. But what's going to happen to me? I'm so unqualified. I don't know where I'm going to go. So he was praying. He was regularly praying and chanting. He was often chanting a specific prayer to Krishna that, like, please help me. And it's a very emotional prayer. Let me read it to you right now. Ai dina dayadranath he, maturanatha kadavalokyuse, hridayam twad aloka kataram, dayata brahmyati kim karom yaham. And the translation, O my Lord, O most merciful Master, O Master of Mathura, when shall I see you again? Because of my not seeing you, my agitated heart has become unsteady. O most beloved one, what shall I do now? Kim karom yaham means, what shall I do now? So he was lamenting and praying like that to the Lord, And as he was doing that, he was crying. He was lamenting. And, it was you could say it was a very emotional scene. Kumarahata, right, Kumarahata, that's it. Thanks. Kumarahata, it's not far from Panihati, it's a little way, maybe 20, or not even 20 kilometers. So, so Ramachandra Puri came in. There's Madhavendra Puri lamenting, as we've just read, and crying. And this Ramachandra Puri, he was a very critical fellow. Not just critical just for the sake of it, but he felt that it was his service to the devotees. He felt it was like his devotee care, you could say, to point out the faults of the devotees. In effect, it was just criticism, actually. But he was thinking, this is my service. I'm doing this as a service to help the devotees. But, so anyway, there's Madhavendra Puri. And like we said, and Ramachandra Puri sees him, and he thinks, oh, what service should I do? Last service. And he sees the lamentation is going on, and this Ramachandra Puri, he was a devotee, sort of, but he was mixed. He was also an impersonalist. So he thought, I know how I will serve my guru. I will give him some good advice, so he is better prepared for leaving his body. So Ramachandra Puri told him that, why are you lamenting like this? Why are you crying like this? You're overly emotional. You should stabilize your mind by focusing on Brahman, and then you'll be fixed, and you'll be able to deal with death better. So this is impersonal. This is Mayavad. Focus your mind on the impersonal Brahman. So Madhavendra Puri, we explained how he was pleased with Ishvara Puri, so pleased. He just blessed him for his service. So what he did with Ramachandra Puri, he told him, it's also a type of blessing, sort of, kind of. He said, you get out of here, you nonsense impersonalist. Madhavendra Puri said, if I see you when I'm leaving my body, I don't know what my destination will be. Yeah, it's really heavy. It could be taken as a blessing if Ramachandra Puri had then thought, oh, wow, I really said the wrong thing and I committed an offense. And then, he apologized, offered his obeisances, and tried to do some actual service. That could have been a blessing if it shook him up and, gave him a reality check. But that didn't happen. Rather, he became angry. Naughty spiritual master. You're not meant to speak to me like that. I gave you good advice. Why are you criticizing me? That's how he thought. And as a result of that rebuke, chastisement from Madhavendra Puri, and then along with Ramachandra Puri's just the very bad way he took it. So he became a real offender. He was already something of an offender, but now he became like fixed in offense, fixed in criticism, and fixed in impersonal understandings. So, it's a bit of a long story. I won't go through the whole thing. But the thing is that eventually he criticized Lord Chaitanya. He thought he would take it upon himself to point out some of the faults of Lord Chaitanya. In his mind, he thought, I'm trying to help him. But it was nonsense criticism, and there was no validity to it and no value. It was just criticism. So that's a long story, but basically that's what he did. He became critical of everyone for everything. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta says he achieved nishta, steadiness in criticism. And he offended Lord Chaitanya, like we said, and he would in Jagannath Puri. And eventually he left Jagannath Puri. And when he left, the devotees had a festival. After he left, not like a going away party. After he left, they had a festival that, he's gone. How wonderful. You don't want to become that sort of devotee that when you go, people think good. That's really good. So all this negativity came upon him because he didn't do devotee care. And otherwise, with Madhavendra Puri, I'm saying particularly, but then also with the other devotees, he didn't really care. He just criticized. He got a taste out of criticizing. So this is, it's such an interesting pastime in Chaitanya Charitamrita, how one devotee cared so nicely and got great mercy, and another devotee, his godbrother, he didn't care, but rather he was unkind. He was unkind to his spiritual master. He was unkind to the other devotees and ultimately Lord Chaitanya. And what a terrible result he got. So again, there you go. Devotee care. Devotee care. If you really get into devotee care, then you will get mercy. There's a saying, if you give mercy, you get mercy. Yeah. Basically, whatever you give out, you'll get back. So therefore, we should really try and care for devotees. Now, let's see. Let me mention another incident from Chaitanya Charitamrita. Yeah, okay, you know what I'll do? I'll tell you the story. It's the story of Shivananda Sain and the dog. Actually, it's one of my favorite stories from Chaitanya Charitamrita. Shivananda Sain and the dog, and how he cared for the dog. And this will show us that if you are cared for by a devotee, if you receive care from a devotee, it's greatly beneficial. I mean, among other things, it will show that. Yeah, it's also from Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's just sure, what an amazing story. That every year, the devotees from Navadweep and the different other areas, including Kumarahatta, where Ishvarapuri was from, including Panihati, including Navadweep, including, you name it, all the Vaishnav places in Bengal and northern Orissa. So Shivananda Sen, he was a very expert manager, very together person. He knew how to speak to people and so on. So he would organize the devotees, and hundreds of devotees would go. And he would make the arrangements, because they're just walking. And it's, from Navadweep, it's about at least a good 600 kilometers plus, maybe 650, to Jagannath Puri. So he would arrange their places of accommodation, because they'd have to spend the night for I don't know how many days, but a good number of days. How many kilometers can you walk in a day? 600 and something kilometers. So it must have been a couple of weeks or more. So he would arrange for the accommodation. He would arrange for prasadam. He would arrange, there in that part of the country, there are many rivers which are running across country and out into the sea. And they would have to cross the rivers. They'd have to take boats. So he would arrange the boats. And like this, he was really caring for the devotees. It's amazing. So the description is there in Chaitanya Charitamrita, how one time, as they were just sort of in the process, they're somewhere en route. They're not near Puri yet. They're somewhere along the way. And a dog became attached to the party, a street dog. Well, I think in those days they only had street dogs. So he became attached to the party. And Shivananda Sen accepted him as a member of the party. And he looked after the dog just as he looked after the people. Particularly two things. He would provide prasadam for the dog, and he would arrange for the dog to cross the rivers with the party on the boats, because, obviously there are no bridges in those days across, fairly substantial rivers. So he would pay money. He paid money. I mean, they had a form of currency of little conch shells and little items which had certain values attributed to them. So he would pay for the dog to cross the rivers. And, it wasn't a material attachment like, at home. Some people and even some devotees have pet dogs, and they get into it and playing around with the dogs, etc., etc. You all know what I mean. He just accepted him as one of the party and provided for him prasadam and the transport across the rivers. So they are approaching Jagannath Puri. They're not quite there. They're still a day, maybe 2 days away, but they're getting there. And one day, Shivananda Sen got caught up with a tax collector making some payment for the party, and there were complications. It doesn't describe what the complications were, but there were complications, and he just got stuck for the whole day with the tax collector. And he asked one of the devotees to feed the dog. To feed the dog what? Rice. He told him, please give him, a plate of rice. So he gave that instruction to one of the devotees, but the devotee didn't do it. And Shivananda Sen came back in the evening. They've reached the place where they're going to stay overnight. And he came along and he asked, where's the dog? And nobody knew. And the dog was not around. And so he asked that devotee, did you feed the dog? And the devotee said, oh, no, I forgot. Sorry about that. So the dog, the dog was a dog. And when animals get hungry, they get hungry. And that's just, that's the way it goes. So what happened was the dog was hungry and it went. Because the dog felt, I got to find something to eat. So he just left the party. And Shivananda Sen was really disturbed. He was really upset. Anyway, next morning they carried on, and I think, not the next day, but I think the day after, they arrived in Puri. And so Shivananda Sen took the devotees to what is called the Gambira. That's where Lord Chaitanya was staying in Puri. The Gambira, it's in the gardens of what was like the house and the estate of Kashi Mishra, who was something like chief priest in the Puri temple, something along those lines. Something like that. Some very important person in spiritual circles there, and very close to the king. So Lord Chaitanya was staying there in a very small place, and along came Shivananda Sen with the devotees. So they arrived there. There's Lord Chaitanya. They all offered their obeisances, and they got up, and Shivananda Sen saw, there's the dog. There's that dog who was with us. And Lord Chaitanya was interacting with the dog. Lord Chaitanya was taking pieces of coconut pulp, the white from the inside, taking some of that coconut pulp, and he would call out to the dog, chant, Krishna, Krishna. And the dog would bark, and Lord Chaitanya would throw him a piece of coconut pulp, and the dog would catch the coconut pulp in his mouth. So Shivananda Sen saw Lord Chaitanya's doing this, again and again, and it's like a sort of a rasa, a relationship he has with the dog. And Shivananda Sen, he went up to the dog and he offered full dandavats on the ground to the dog and apologized to the dog for the offense of not feeding him. So he was very caring. Shivananda Sen was very, very caring. He even cared about the street dog to the point that, like we said, he offered his obeisances and begged for forgiveness. So the dog was cared for. We talked about Ishvara Puri, who did devotee care, Ramachandra Puri, who did the opposite to devotee care. He sort of did devotee abuse. And now here is a living entity who is cared for by a devotee. And that dog, Chaitanya Charitamrita describes, that dog, a few days later, the dog went out into the streets and started doing a dog kirtan on his own. He would stand up on his rear legs and in a certain way, but recognizably, he'd chant the holy names. And as a result, people gathered around him. They're so amazed that even though it's a dog, and even though it's not like a regular human being singing or something like that, but still it's recognizable as being the holy names. So one day, surrounded by people doing this type of kirtan, the dog left his body and went back to Godhead on the basis of the care that he received from a devotee. So that should not be underestimated, that when someone, or even just some living entity, is cared for by a devotee nicely, then there's great spiritual benefit for the person who is cared for. And therefore, for us, for people like us, practicing devotees, a program like Food for Life, just as one example, a program like Food for Life is very important in different ways. One way, of course, is we're caring by giving prasadam. That's care. That's good. But then it goes deeper. Excuse me, it goes deeper. That the recipients of the care, they become influenced. And even if, they become influenced, they hear the kirtan, that's one thing. That's very good. Because kirtan should be there, ideally at least, and it really should be there when we distribute prasad, as much as humanly possible at least. But just by seeing the devotees, just by thinking positively about the devotees, those people are benefited. And therefore it's a form of, you could say, devotee care indirectly, devotee to be care. Devotee to be care. It's true. It's really true. And, therefore, when we're moving around, driving around here and there and just moving around here and there as we do, it's always nice to have prasadam on hand, because you meet beggars. And, even sometimes it's not beggars, it's just you meet some people and they say, oh, you're Hare Krishna. So it's really nice if you can take some prasadam with you and give it out to the beggars. Better not to give money, but give prasadam and tell them, you got to eat this. Are you going to eat it? And they must say yes. And then you tell them, okay, I'll watch you to make sure they don't try to sell it or trade it for a cigarette or something. I mean, if possible. And that's also a form of caring, sort of devotee to be care. I want to tell you a little story. Maybe I'll conclude with this little story. It's a pretty good one. This is from, I forget, it's at least 10 years ago. It may be a bit more. Anyway, it's a good number of years ago. We used to go, at least I used to go, from time to Mozambique. And we would drive. From Joburg, we'd drive through Nelspruit and out, and then we'd cross the border. So we go through the South African side, they're more efficient, they stamp you, away you go. And you enter the Mozambique side, and anyway, whatever. You go through the process there. So one day, one afternoon, we were in the Mozambique side, in the room there, the sort of little hall where you get your visa, or you get the stamp in your passport. And we're just waiting in the line, and, it's all going on. And one elderly street man walked up to me. And he was elderly, like 60-ish or something along those lines. And you just one look, you see, oh, he's a street person wearing these really tatty clothes and really not clean. And he had this long, you might call it a trench coat, perhaps, a long kind of heavyish coat going down pretty much to the feet for cold weather, that sort of thing. So he walked up to me and he poked me with his finger, just very lightly, he poked me. And he looked at me, he leaned towards me, and he said, Prabhupada. I thought, wow, what's this? I'm not Prabhupada. Then he put his hand inside this big coat of his and pulled out a science of self-realization, which was in such a condition. It was, it looked as bad as he looked, or worse. It was dirty. It was all, the ends of the pages were all turned, like heavily turned. It was just a mess, but it was a science of self-realization. So he's holding the book, and he comes over to me sort of a little close, not right in my face, but, say a couple of feet or 1.5 feet from me. And he just repeated, he's holding the book, Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. that was an experience. So somehow he got the book. It was in English, and he didn't speak English, actually. I tried to speak a little to him, but he in Mozambique, and other than the people in the cities, and not even so many of them, definitely the people in the countryside, they don't speak English. But somehow he got the book. Means somehow a devotee had distributed the book somehow to someone, and through whatever means, it ended up with that person. And he was really into Prabhupada. He was really into Prabhupada. So, yeah, again, so, in other words, I'd say he's sort of like a pre-Kanishta, but he's definitely somewhere in the picture of Krishna consciousness, albeit right at the very beginning somewhere. So caring, the ramifications go far beyond the immediate. Even the immediate is extremely important, like we talked about Ishvarapuri, Ramachandra Puri. But even it goes way beyond the immediate. So, Dhruvananda Prabhu, thank you so much for inviting me and everybody, Dwarkadish Prabhu, Divya Shakti, and Rohini Kumar, and everybody. Thank you so much. And I don't know, what now?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So thank you very much for that very instructive discourse, bringing the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, and how we should practice devotee care. I think it really went deep into our hearts, and we can really take much home and much to heart. Thank you very much, Maharaj. I think the next part of the program rather is we have two questions, and Divya Shakti Mataji will be reading out these questions.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, dear Maharaj. Thank you so much for making the time to spend this evening with us and teach us about devotee care. I've learned so much. It's been a really, really amazing session so far. So far we only have two questions. I'm going to read the first one out. That's from Yavat Prabhu. And Prabhu says, one second. Okay. So Prabhu says, he says, okay, Hare Krishna, dear Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. From some recent experiences, I found that, please forgive me, it's a little bit hard to read here. There we go. From some recent experiences, I found that Krishna placed us in a position where we were asked by a devotee to help and support them. We try sincerely to assist. Due to disqualification, inexperience, and being of a low adhikar, we either end up making things worse for those devotees or giving them inexperienced advice. This can hurt relationships and fracture our community as well. How do we truly help such devotees, especially younger ones who are reluctant to get help from older, more experienced and mature Vaishnavas? Is there a way we can heal and rectify broken relationships where such insufficient devotee care has fractured parts of the community and done more harm than good? Yours, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Yavat Prabhu. So, I'd say you seem to be talking specifically about giving advice. And, giving advice is not something to be done lightly, particularly if there's some sort of more complex situation. I mean, it's one thing if it's just something very simple. I mean, very, very simple. But if it's, someone's got some situation in their life and, they're in difficulty and they're distressed or to some degree in distress and they ask, what to do. Well, one qualification that devotees need to develop and pray to Krishna to help them develop is the ability to understand when I can help and when it may be better to call someone else to help. Yeah, and if you're faced with the person has some problem and you're thinking, gosh, I don't know what to say, then don't try to say anything. Yeah, because you'll just make it worse. I mean, it would only be by accident that you might possibly help them. And it's so much easier to, if you don't know what to do, it's so much easier to do the wrong thing. There's usually a number of possible wrong things and only one right thing, something like that. So, yeah, we should not try to help in situations where, it's clear enough to us that we're not actually qualified. Rather, we should somehow or other arrange for someone who's more capable. That's really an important thing because, this is one of the most sensitive areas of life. Not just in Krishna consciousness, but just life for people. People get into difficulty, they need help. That's so sensitive. So anyway, that's what I would say. I think that's my answer there. Okay?
Thank you so much, Maharaj. There's just one more question.
Okay.
And the question is a simple one. It just says, whilst we are experiencing rather challenging times in the midst of a third wave, how can we practically practice devotee care? This was a Facebook question. Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay. Yeah, well, don't do something through which you may get COVID. Going back a year or whatever it was, a little more, there were devotees who were saying that let's not worry about it. Let's just get out and just do everything as normal. A number of them are not with us any longer because they died. And others, got sick and sure. I have heard, and I'm sure some of you know through experience, it's a hellish disease. So we should use our intelligence. We should use our intelligence, for example, to preach, to do preaching programs, to reach out in innovative ways, creative ways, to help people become Krishna conscious. And, things like prasadam distribution, food for life and all that, then we should see how to do it, maybe in pre-packed ways or whatever ways in which we're not going to really have contact like that. And otherwise, I'll tell you what, when I was in Santon for 2 months, we every Saturday and Sunday we were doing programs in the garden. So we should try and figure out, I know there's some extra care now because of what they call the third wave, but I'm sure there are ways that we can actually make gatherings, at least say when the third wave, the worst part is over. We can make gatherings with social distancing and all of that, and have sadhu sangha, just in intelligent ways. And otherwise, there's so many programs on the internet now. Good Lord. You can be in a really nice Krishna conscious program 24 hours a day. Yeah, there's so many programs going on. And it's nice. It's great. And we should understand that Krishna is behind it. It's not just, some nonsense horror show. Krishna's behind it for the devotees. So we can learn, it can be clearer to us, what is this material world? It's not just a great garden for enjoyment. It's a real horror show, the material world. And we can learn to use our intelligence to maintain and develop our Krishna consciousness despite the different inconveniences. Like, let me just close by saying, we did the Bhakti Shastri, and we had the biggest Bhakti Shastri in the history of ISKCON by far. By far. And if it hadn't been for COVID, we wouldn't have done it. And I tell you what, really a lot of those devotees who have now got Bhakti Shastri, they would never have got Bhakti Shastri. They would never have got, because they're just sort of not the type, to really knuckle down and do a whole big, several months long, everyday course. But they had nothing else to do. So they did it. Thank you, COVID. Okay, so Dwarkadish Prabhu has his hand up.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. My question is, what does it take, from an internal perspective, also to, improve your devotee care? For example, for me, I'm just, thinking of Srila Prabhupada's exception in terms of devotee care. We see of so many pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. His direct care is amazing. But so if we take that, in our times now, in our society right now, and I look at many devotees, that inspire me. For example, just Niranjan Swami. I've met him just once, but wherever you see him, whatever he's doing, his mood is so wonderful and he's so warm that you just get attracted to him. And he has the time, to talk to people and help them. And he's developing devotee care very nicely. I'm just thinking that it must be a lot of practice Krishna consciousness and really be deep in your meditation and your sadhana. How can we also learn from that and sort of implement that in our lives so that it's not just a ritual, but it's a real loving care? And I know, Maharaj yourself also, in terms of, giving this whole overtime, daily in and out, inspiring devotees. Myself, I was not meant to do Bhakti Shastri again, but, you just inspired me. So, that type of mood and, deep sort of actions, how can we sort of follow in those footsteps to really do justice in terms of devotee care, learn to love? What real meaning in it? Thank you, Maharaj.
Well, a simple example, at least, is a person can only care as much as they have the eyes and the heart to see the need for care. If they're just in the mood of enjoyment, then they'll see the people as objects of enjoyment, and the people who need care will just be a nuisance, like crossing the road. The sort of fit people, they just cross the road. When the lights, the robot goes like that. But then some old invalid person, they struggle across the road and delay the traffic. And if you're in the mood of enjoyment, you think, what's this person doing? So because of your consciousness, because of their consciousness, they haven't got the capacity to care, because they're so much in the enjoyment mood. But if we develop the awareness of the need to be cared for, which is there, the need of, not just the poor people who receive food for life, not just the people, people who are in anxiety who need to, somehow be calmed down, but everybody desperately needs care. But we need the heart and we need the consciousness to be aware of that. And that's what Prabhupada had. There's that story from Mayapur. Many years ago, they're feeding the Bangladesh refugees. And Prabhupada's looking down, and some of the people come out, throw their leaf plate in the rubbish sort of thing, whole rubbish area. And the dogs come in and try and lick a bit of khichdi off the leaf plate. But some people who couldn't get in to get prasadam, they were going through the leaf plates also to get a few pieces of rice and fighting with the dogs. And Prabhupada was watching from one level up. And there was one devotee with him. And the devotee said, Prabhupada, when I see this, sometimes I feel like crying. And Prabhupada said, why just sometimes? So the thing is, to develop that heart, we have to develop our Krishna consciousness. It's not just a sentiment, an emotion, but it's the manifestation of a purified and softened and opened up heart to be able to see like that and feel like that. And then when you do like that, then it's very natural. It's sort of unstoppable. Such devotees, they won't stop doing caring things. So therefore, I'd say, in essence, in simple terms, the bottom line is we have to really develop our Krishna consciousness through attentive chanting, and we have to develop that type of intellect by reading the books of Srila Prabhupada regularly. We need to go out of our ways to really chant well and really read regularly and nicely. It's okay to be a Krishna conscious workaholic, from morning till night, without chanting nicely and without maybe reading at all, and thinking, yeah, I'm doing so much service, which, there's something to be said for it. But if we don't cultivate the consciousness sufficiently, then what you're talking about, that the actual change of heart, softening of heart, and that type of awareness and perception, it's not going to develop. That's all there is to it. Hare Krishna, devotees, thank you. I think I have to go now.
Thank you very much, Maharaj, for sharing these very deep realizations. And thank you very much once again for giving us your time. I know, you've been at giving another class before this. So once again, Maharaj, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada's Devotee Care ki jai. Haribol.
Hare Krishna. So devotees, whilst Maharaj leaves, there's